There's a lot of people here. Cool. So I was going to tweet something cool to see if I could get that Swiss Army knife, but I'm pretty sure if I took that on a plane, I'd be labeled a terrorist in America. So I'm going to pass on that one. So my name's Brian Holt, and I work at Netflix, which is kind of a fun thing. I'm excited to be here in Bern. This is the first time I've ever been to Bern. Not first time I've ever been to Switzerland. Been here a couple times. So yeah, I work at Netflix. Who here has a Netflix account? And who here just steals someone else's login? I see you. I see you. Me too. That's okay. And then I used to work at Reddit. Who here in here uses Reddit? And who here is ashamed to admit that they use Reddit? That's me, for sure. So yeah, I've worked at 2 companies whose entire purpose is just to waste your time. So that's kind of made it my life goal, to just waste your time. So I'm from San Francisco, that's where I live right now, but lived in Utah for a really, really long time. Go Jazz. Any NBA fans out there? Yeah, someone fist back there. Yeah. And then I lived in Milan for 2.5 years. So that's why I'd been to Switzerland a couple of times, is I went up to Ticino a couple of times, which is slightly different, I suppose. Yeah. Are there any Italians here? Ci sono degli italiani? You too? Okay. Yeah, Forza Italia. Can I say that here? Am I going to get thrown out? Probably. It's okay. And this is my the puppy tax, right? This is my dog that we left back in San Francisco. So the person up here was supposed to be Jaffer Hussein, so I'm sorry to disappoint all of you that were expecting to hear from him, but my country kind of sucks right now. And yeah, this man's biggest crime is being Canadian. Seriously, nicest guy in the world. I was happy to stand in for him, but it sucks he couldn't come. And so we're going to be talking about the future of JavaScript today, and kind of how it happens, why it happens, where it's going, where it's been, all these different things. So unfortunately, Jaffer, who was supposed to be here, is actually on this committee, TC39. I am not. So I might be making up some of these things. That's kind of my disclaimer for you. So TC39, Technical Committee 39, is the committee that standardizes what is ECMAScript. And we're going to kind of start defining some of these terms because they're dumb. Like, why can't we just call it JavaScript? But whatever, it is what it is. So TC39, they define a document which is called ECMA 262. And what is ECMAScript is then used to define what is JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually an implementation of ECMAScript, whereas ECMAScript is kind of the abstract, right? There are no other implementations, as far as I know, of ECMAScript other than JavaScript, because why? I don't know why you would need another one, but there's not. And so that's kind of how the process works. ECMA used to be called ECMA with all capital letters. It was an acronym for the European Computer Manufacturer Associations, and now it is literally just the letters ECMA, which I found kind of interesting. It's like you had a chance to rename yourself and you stuck with ECMA. Good for you. So yeah, it's a group that oversees a bunch of other standards. Like they oversee Dart as well. They oversee C#, and there's a couple other ones that they oversee as well. But who cares, because we only care about JavaScript. So yeah, ECMAScript is what they call the actual document or the actual spec that defines what is JavaScript. And there's been a bunch of revisions of it and kind of a tumultuous history, right? We all know that, or possibly all know, that Brendan Eich kind of implemented JavaScript LiveScript, as it used to be called, which I kind of wish we'd stuck with that name because no one likes Java, right? No one here? No one likes Java? Cool. No, you don't. Just kidding. I don't like Java. So I'm going to piss off someone really quick here. So it used to be called LiveScript, and they wanted to ride that Java wave, so they renamed it JavaScript. Thanks Netscape. And So we've had a couple different specs here, major revisions of the language. It used to take forever for them to put out a new spec, like seriously on the order of like 5 or 6 years at a time. And that kind of sucked, so they decided to kind of change that up. And we also skipped ECMAScript 4 because that was just like too controversial. And we'll talk here in just a second, actually what was in there. So features are now added in stages. With the advent of ES 2015, ES 6, we changed how everything works. So what was in ES 3? I mean, this is way before my time when I was writing code. I was probably just playing video games too much. They added things like regex, right? String methods, there was try catch, there's a lot more to it, but this was just kind of some of the highlights. Like, can you imagine having to write parts of JavaScript without try catch? Like, it would be kind of unfun. We're gonna go with that. It's gonna not be fun. ES5 added things like JSON.stringify, JSON.parse, like some of these features that are super, super useful to us. Getters and setters, which I still don't think we're taking advantage enough. Like, there's some cool patterns we can do with getters and setters and not really used as much. Strict mode, which was kind of a misfire in my opinion. I don't know. The point of JavaScript is they always want to be backwards compatible. They never want to break the web. This is always kind of an ongoing argument is, can we break the web? Can we not break the web? So far, we haven't broken the web. And so what they wanted to do is they added this feature called strict mode, where they could kind of opt out of the bad parts of JavaScript. For example, it won't allow you to use with, right? If you've ever played around with, it's one of the most beautifully terrible parts of JavaScript. But strict mode kind of like strips out kind of these ugly parts of JavaScript. And also added some things like object reflection, things like that. So ES4, it's kind of interesting to go digging into what was going to be ES4, and it was really the kitchen sink. It was everything, right? It had classes, which might sound familiar to you because they're in ES6. It had modules, which are also in ES6. It had data types. Like, there was actually like optional typing in ES4, which was kind of interesting, which at this point I don't think we'll ever really see added directly to JavaScript. However, we're kind of promised that they're going to reserve the colon for types. So they're never going to use colons for anything else so that we can continue using those things for like TypeScript and Flow and things like that. Generators, right? So that sound familiar to you? Also got added in ES6, but they were going to be added in ES4. Destructuring, one of my favorite features of ES6. And they basically even added like JSX, right? Like, for those of you that write React, like they basically added JSX way back when, and it was called E4X. And this is actually what it looked like, which is kind of interesting. Does that not look like JSX to you? I mean, it pretty much is. And this almost became a part of the JavaScript language. It was really pushed hard by Mozilla to the point that Firefox actually would run this, and so would Rhino and some of those other JavaScript engines. But the other people just was like, no, we're not going to do this. Microsoft in particular fought really hard against this. But this was actually a primitive that was trying to be added in ES4. And actually to the point that this was actually still a standard in Firefox until 2014, which is crazy to me. I didn't realize that it actually had survived that long. So anyway, why didn't ES4 actually make it? It was too much, going too many different ways. I mean, it's almost like politics, where they just tried to cram all these different like bills together and pass it through the government, right? And it just didn't work. There was just too much controversy on all sides that everyone was pissed off and no one was happy about anything, so they just kind of abandoned ship. They said, like, we're just going to give up on ES4, we're going to take a much smaller part of this and make it ES5, which is actually what ended up happening. So what actually makes it into JS these days now? Like, what's the test that they use to add things to JavaScript? Well, the first thing that they always looked to do first is, does this enable new things, right? Can you not do this without this particular feature? And a good example of that would be generators, right? There are certain patterns that you can do with generators that you simply cannot achieve any other way, right, without generators. Things like CSP, right, like Go channels and those sorts of things. Like, you can't really simulate that kind of behavior in JavaScript. It's simply not possible with the primitives that ES5 had. But by adding generators, we added an entire new class of programming that we could do. This is the first thing that they're really looking to add into the JavaScript language, right? The other thing that they start trying to add is things like promises, right? You can do promises in JavaScript without the standard promises that are built into the browser, right? Things like Bluebird already existed. In fact, as far as I know, Bluebird is actually still faster than the one that's built into the browser because those people are wizards. Like, I don't know how they accomplish some of the things that they do. So that's the next thing they try to add, is things that if they added them to the language, then they could be used as part of the language, right? Like, for example, the fetch API, so that you can, request a resource and get a promise back that represents the resource. If that's not built into the language, you can't do that, right? You can't have Bluebird interact directly with the browser. You need the browser to have its own version of a promise. So they added promises into the spec so that these APIs could start using promises as like a returned type. And the other thing is something like JSON.stringify, that if you include that as a library, it's a really big library and it's really slow, right? Whereas if they include it as part of the browser, you can make it really fast, you can make it written in C++, you can accomplish all these other things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Everything else really should just be added as a library, right? We're not going to add JSX as part of the browser, right? Because there's no point to it. Like, we can accomplish that through Babel and some of these other things. So those things, we want to see them as something written by users, something that can be updated often, something that can be included as a library. So let's talk about the process of how it actually ends up getting into the browser, or getting into the browser, into the spec. So it goes through 4 stages, and I just want to kind of show you that, like, if you're frustrated that, for example, the decorators haven't made it into the language yet, this is why. The process takes some time because we don't really want to add everything willy-nilly. JavaScript is an ever-expanding language, right? And if we keep adding things, it gets harder and harder for new people to come. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about the web. It's actually a very approachable platform, right? You can teach new people how to use JavaScript because it's a pretty understandable language. But if we add everything into the language, it gets really hard and really unapproachable for people. And the language just starts having like weird interactions with itself, right? For example, when we added classes, adding classes to JavaScript added a lot of complexity because now classes have a lot of things that they have to interact with. So let's talk about the process that we make sure that these kind of things don't necessarily creep into the language, and we've kind of slowed our roll in terms of things being added. The first thing is pretty much anyone can propose a stage 0 proposal, which is called a straw man proposal. However, for it to advance, it needs to be championed by one of the members of TC39. So you have to go find someone that's actually into what you're trying to do, or otherwise it's always going to stay in stage 0 and it's never going to make it out of there. But I will say that things that make it to stage 0, I'm going to go ahead and venture a guess that less than half actually make it to stage 1. These are just kind of like pie in the sky. You don't really need anything other than an idea for it to be a proposal or a straw man. But once someone says, like, this is a good idea, we want to talk about this, it'll advance to stage 1. And so already advancing to stage 1, you have a much better chance of making it into the language. At this point, you need to define pretty concretely like the API, and you want to have some example usages, kind of like the happy path, as I'd like to call it, right? The ways that you're going to use it. You don't have to define all the edge cases and all the crazy interactions or anything like that. So, but it's still to be hammered out, right? You're not going to think of everything up front. You're not going to think of all these like, well, what about this? What about being used with promises? What about being used in Node, right? Like, you don't have to think about all these things up front. And it's still expected to change pretty majorly before it actually ends up landing in the browser. So at this point, it's still definitely not a guarantee. There's still a great chance that this will not make it in the browser. In other words, you don't want to ship code with stage 1 code. That's a recipe for disaster. Okay, so stage 2, it's a draft. At this point, there's a much better chance that it's going to make it into the language. The committee will start expecting this feature to land. Like, they're going to start treating this thing as if it's going to land, right? In stage 1, they won't make any plans about it. They're not going to depend on the fact. But at stage 2, they're going to start planning around this thing making it into the language. But there still are incremental changes expected. At this point, what they're going to expect is that it lands as a Babel plugin, right? A Babel transformation, so people out in the world can start trying it out and see if it works and those sorts of things. But at this point, it's still not a guarantee that it's going to make it into the language. Lots of stage 2 proposals are still not added. Once it's in stage 3, it's probably going to make it. Probably. Like I say this, I'm going to give you a bunch of counterexamples, but it's likely to land at this point. So little to no changes are expected, especially from like the committee. The committee does not expect the changes at all anymore, and the only things that are expected to change are supposed to come back from like Chrome and Firefox and Safari and those teams saying like, hey, you said this is a terrible idea, we're not going to do this. An example of that would be tail call recursion, right? It's actually a feature in ES6, but it's actually not implemented in very many browsers. And the reason being is that no one can agree on how it should be done. Should it be proper? Should it be syntactical? Anyway, I'm not going to get into that argument because it's not one I'm interested in having again. Just go troll Kyle Simpson if you want to have that argument again. It's fun. It's what I do in my spare time. But at this point, stage 3, it's pretty much guaranteed to be into the language at that point. And at stage 4, it's done. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say about stage 3, it's expected to be in one browser at this point. Like one browser, like we'll put it like Firefox, we'll put it behind a flag, and you can actually start playing with it built into a browser. Stage 4, it's finished, it's done, it's ready to ship. 2 browsers should implement it at this point. And it should have tests for Test Suite 262, which is a giant suite of tests that basically browsers can run on themselves to see if they are compliant with the spec. So at this point, they should have all their tests added to 262 and no changes. It is done, and at this point, it is in the language. And then every April, I believe, every April they make a hard cutoff and say, yeah. They'll make a hard cutoff, it's every March, saying that everything that is stage 4 is now part of ES 2018, right? And if you miss that March deadline, you have to wait till the next year until you become officially a part of that spec. So as of 2015, this is the way that they started doing it. It's basically a train that's always running, and if you can hop onto the train, then you'll make the next proposal, et cetera, et cetera. So from March to July, they'll make only editorial changes, and then in July, it is finished, it is done. But if you miss that train, then you have to wait till the next year. So in case you're wondering, here's some of the more recent specs. 2017 saw quite a bit of stuff get done. 2016 was, I think, only 2 features. It was exponents and it was an array method. I can't remember which one. Array includes, thank you. ES 2017 saw quite a bit. We saw object entries, object values, async await. Go team. I'm on team async await. String pad start, pad end, because left pad, right? Okay. Object get on property descriptors, trailing commas and parameters. I'm a big fan of that one too. And shared memory and atomics, which is going to be really useful for WebAssembly. I could give another talk on WebAssembly. I'm sure someone will. I'm not going to talk about that today. ES 2018, just lifting template literal restrictions. That was the only one that actually made it in time for this one. As far as I could tell from the repo, sometimes it's kind of hard to divine what they actually mean when they write those things. So ES 2018 will be pretty sparse, but I think, again, in 2019, we should see a pretty large amount of cool stuff being added. So this was like basically one of the biggest projects that pushed the web forward, written by some punk kid out of Australia. I'm pretty sure Sebastian could beat me up, so I'm not going to say that. No, I mean, Sebastian wrote this library called 6-to-5, which actually ended up being Babel eventually, because they didn't want to limit it to be just from ES6 to ES5. They wanted it to be a platform of innovation going forward. And it's just a pluggable platform where you can transform your code from future code back to current code. And what this enabled was a whole basically the entire developer community could start writing future JavaScript but not worry about breaking the web, right? And not only supporting brand new browsers. Because to that point, I'm sure most of you are aware, we could really only write ES5 if we were lucky and ES3 if you were unlucky, right? If you still had to support like Internet Explorer 6, right? But no one has to support that anymore, right? I just saw like this like sullen look in people's faces. I share your pain. I share your pain. So, all that to say, this is kind of like the baseline of, I wanted to show you how it got into the language, why it got into the language. Now I want to talk about cool shit I'm really excited about. And we're kind of start backwards from like stage 3 and working our way back into stage 0. So object, rest, and spread, this one's going to be super great. I'm really, really excited about objects, rest, and spread. So we already have array, spread, and rest. But take a look at this one. So you have x and y, which that'll pull it out as variables x and variable y, and you can refer to those however you want to. And then you can do dot, 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 z, and then everything else that's in the object is going to pull those out into another object for you, right? I'm sure you can see how this could be useful. Or maybe not, but you'll figure it out. And then you can do, so that would be, Jesus, I always have the worst time remembering which is which. That will be the rest, the rest operator. And then the other one's going to be the spread operator. So you have x and y, so that's going to be, those two variables are going to be added into n, right? And then everything else from z will be added as well. So it's basically like merging those two objects. Well, in a sense, right? So that will be really great, and we can use that in tandem with array spread. Some regex improvements. People are either really excited about this or don't give a shit. I'm excited about it. It depends on how much you like writing regular expressions. So look behind. This is one that I've been chomping at the bit for, right? Like we've had look ahead for a while, but look behind it's just been notably absent for a long time. But we're finally going to get it. Named capture groups are going to be really, really great because you can say like, okay, I want this part of the string, and you don't have to figure out like what index in the array it is. That'll be really great too. Better Unicode support, and furthermore, you're actually going to be able to support features like only selecting Greek characters or only selecting Cyrillic characters or things like that. That'll be really, really nice, especially if you've had to write that, like I have. We just launched Thai support, and I don't know if you've ever tried to support Thai, but it's an adventure, I'll put it that way. Dynamic modules, I'm sure this is probably something you've already kind of been looking into or may have been looking into because it's already kind of been happening with Webpack supporting code splitting, right? That's kind of like the killer feature that comes around with modules. So before we had require.ensure, that's how you used to do it with common.js, but now it's system.import. And this is really great because it allows things like lazy loading of your modules, right? Like you can define your bare minimum to bootstrap your page, and then you can load everything else lazily, which is going to be really, really, really great. Great for the web, great for supporting markets that don't necessarily have broadband or the broadband penetration that you would like. Global, how many of you have done this before? Global object is window, if there is window, otherwise use global, right? They're actually going to standardize it so you can just refer to it as global everywhere, meaning that browsers will start allowing you to refer to the window as global, which I find to be appealing. And not only that, it's going to be standardized across all platforms, so things like JavaScript, if you write like Internet of Things sort of things, global will also be like available there. So you can just always depend on global being available to you. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about like just not having to do like the bullshit of like, if this, then do that. If this, then do that. Anyway, I'm lazy though. So these two really dense subjects, but two really, really exciting things that are going to enable new sorts of programming. Async iterators are really, really great. I'll talk about them kind of in the next slide a little bit too, if you don't know what they are. But generators are really only suitable for synchronous data sources, right? Because when you return done on a generator, it has to be either true or false, right? You can't tell, like, I'm going to tell you later if this is done or not. You have to tell it right now, am I done or am I not done? And that kind of sucks if you have asynchronous sources. So that's what async iterator is really aiming to solve here, is that you can say, here's my value and here's my done, and I don't know if this is it. And this is going to be pretty awesome, in my opinion. I'll show you some code of what that looks like on the next slide. But I grouped together with observable because these two are kind of locked together in the sense of they want to advance them kind of at the same rate so that they play nicely with each other. That's what they're trying to avoid. I say they, TC39, the people that are much smarter than me. They don't want to have these like disparate features that are totally siloed from each other, right? They want them to interact nicely. Like, they want promises to play with observables and play with async iterators. So we have all these different ways of modeling asynchronous behavior, and we want them to be fit together. So observables, I know there's at least like 2 people in here that are super excited about observables. Everyone else probably just doesn't give a shit, right? Just kidding. Oh, hey, Ben. So there is a proposal, actually championed by Jaffer. I'm sure Ben's kind of into it as well, to add observables directly to the language themselves so that we don't need bullshit like RxJS. Fighting words. I'm just kidding. I love RxJS. So they're actually going to try and add observables to the language itself, which is going to be really great. Like RxJS will still be really, really awesome and something you'll want to use in your projects. I kind of like to tell me if I'm wrong here, but bill it as like the low dash of asynchronous behavior, right? Like it's just like the bat belt, right, of all these different awesome tools that you can use with observables. But it'll be great to have this actually built into the language because we can start having kind of a standardized approach to using observables, and the browser can start using observables, and you can start having all these really, really great ways of interacting with observables. And things like React and Angular and Ember can start depending on observables being there, right? Like for example, if you're writing Angular 2, right, you have to have a way to not use observables because it's such a big library to include just for that particular thing, right? If you don't need it. But if it's built in the language, then the library can just always use it, which I think is going to be amazing. So if you don't know about observables, you definitely should learn about them. They're incredible. I know Ben has an awesome course on it available to take. But you can kind of think of it as an iterator that pushes data at you rather than pulling data out of it. Or you can think of it as a promise that has that will return multiple times over time. So async iterator, this is kind of like one of the ways that you think that you could interact with it. So you might have seen for of loops, which landed in ES6 as well. But this one's going to be really great that it's going to do a for loop, but it's actually going to await for those particular values to return, right? So it's like a generator that you get to kind of wait on. It's similar in that sense. So new class semantics, another one that if you write React, these are ones you should be pretty stoked on. Because React is kind of converging on using classes for its components as opposed to its own create class methodology. But particularly the first one, public class fields, just really simplifies using classes. I'm not a huge class fan, if you've ever talked to me. It's partly due to my dislike of Java. But I don't want to have a class that creates another class, which creates a factory, which extends another one. Yeah, it's not my jam. But having public class fields makes things really easy because you can have static properties which are then available to the class later to use. Another one that's really exciting is something like class and property decorators, where you can actually say here's a method, but you must be authenticated to use this method, right? And you just put a little decorator on top of it. If there are any Python fans out there, you're going to be real stoked on this, right? It's pretty great. So class properties, the part that I want to draw your attention to is that first line under example text, like the class declaration, where it says state equals, is bold, right? You can declare your initial state for React this way, as opposed to having to create a constructor and call the super method and then do that binding. The part underneath it where it says handle click, the declaration of that, you can actually use arrow functions so that the context for this .set state will always be the class. If you don't do that, it's a mess, right? You have to do the binding on it. It's just a mess. So these things greatly simplify writing React. Oh, and here's some decorator stuff, which I think is pretty great. So this is for React Redux, if you're familiar with that. that basically instead of having to call connect with like which returns a function, then you call that function, right? Like all that business, you can just say, hey, I have this component, connect it to Redux for me, thank you, right? And that's pretty great as well. But suffice to say, it's basically a function that will run, that will, you can decorate your data with. This one's again going back to more I18N sort of things, which I'm pretty excited about, because that's one of the things I work on at Netflix is our internationalization of our website. Like I said, I spent way too much time getting all of those Thai characters to display correctly. So it's an API to separate strings into graphemes. And if you don't know what graphemes are, they're fascinating things to deal with. Like you all, like all of you Swiss people, probably have to deal with languages way more than I do. But suffice to say, graphemes are really difficult to deal with in terms, especially in JavaScript. So the idea of a grapheme, if you have like a character, right? So for example, that first one where it says "Io parlo italiano," if you click the right arrow, it's the character that you expect to skip, right? So if I click right, I'm going to go past the I, and then if I click right again, I'm going to go past the O, and if I click right, I'm going to go past the space, right? That's a grapheme. But if you look down here, there in where I wrote it in Thai, right? I wonder why I was thinking about Thai. That's weird. If I click right, there's actually two characters there on that first grapheme, right? There's the main character, and then there's like the little like apostrophe-looking thing on top, right? Two different characters represented by two different Unicode values. And if I click right, you don't want it to split, right? You can't split that character. It's one grapheme, right? So if you click right, you expect it to go all the way past that character. Now, if you try and actually do this with JavaScript, believe me, it's a mess. It's a giant mess, because you have to go and you have to do like some look ahead and look behind to make sure that you're always splitting on the right places. So that Thai makes it really hard for those kind of graphemes. Sometimes accents can be kind of a pain for that too. And then emoji are just a giant hot mess, right? So that character right there is actually 7 characters put together in Java. If you call like that string .length, it returns 7, right? It's ridiculous, right? Because you have woman, which is 2 characters, you have skin tone, which is 2 characters, and you have rockstar, which is also 2 characters, right? So being able to split graphemes for emojis is just magic. It's magical, right? So yeah, it's surprisingly hard and computationally intensive, right? Imagine writing a text editor where you have to be able to split graphemes, right? Something like Atom or Electron or things like that. This is magic for Electron. So while you may not be excited about graphemes today, you will be, damn it. It'll make your Atom faster. Generators? We all love generators, right? No, okay, sorry. I'm excited about generators and generator arrow functions. Right now, in order to use a generator, you have to use the old functions syntax. But Brendan Eich is pretty big on arrow functions, and we're going to add generator arrow functions, which will be nice. Something else that'll be really nice. In fact, I have another code example here for you. So down there, if I ran this function right now, which is just going to basically log out that colors array, it would actually only log out green, blue, and pink today, right? However, if you look at the second line where it says console.log function.send, that's actually going to be the first value that yield is called with. Oh, sorry, not yield, but generator.next is called with. Now, this may not seem like a huge deal to you today, but the first time you call generator.next, no matter what you pass to it, it is always ignored, which is kind of annoying, right? Reason being is that when you call generator.next, it's actually going to go find the first yield, and it's going to stop there, and it actually doesn't care about what it was called with. And today, there's actually no way to access that. And that could be important, right? The first parameter that you call it with could be something important. So that's why function.sent, which is going to be the first value that your generator is called with. So in this particular case, the first value that generator.next is called with is red, right? If I don't console log that function.sent, you'll never see red. So this is just kind of cleaning up something, a rough edge that we have with our current implementation. And this is why it's great that we can, and I also used an arrow function generator up there. This is why it's great that we have this yearly release cycle, right? Because we found that here's a difficult edge for us to solve, and if we were waiting for like an ES7, it would be years, right? But now we get to add this in, 2 years late instead of like 7 years too late. Null propagation error. This might be another one that I'm probably far too excited about. It's a little small, I'm sorry, but I want to call your attention here to the right where it says message.body question mark. Like if you come from a language like, I know Groovy has it, right? And there's probably a bunch of other languages. I think someone was telling me that TypeScript has it. Swift has it as well. Cool. How many times have you done that thing on the left where you're just like, is this an object? Is this an object? Is this an object? Are we still sure that the last one was an object? Okay, now is this still an object, right? Like I've done this just way too many times. Or I use the __get, right? Use that everywhere. Like if you grepped that in the Netflix code base, it's probably about like 40% of the code. And now you just get to do the question mark, right? I think this is a stage 1 proposal now. This really just got added. Like I didn't even see it until I was just looking at the repo for, and I told everyone at Netflix, and there was like, ta-da emojis everywhere. So yeah, this is going to be really, really great for the language. I'm really hoping that one lands. So who here has used moment before? And who here hates including moment because it's so goddamn big? Yeah, that's same hands, right? So they're talking about a proposal about a feature called temporal, which is basically going to be like a moment light, but built into the browser. So you don't have to include all of moment just to get where it says like 5 minutes ago, right? Temporal will do that for you, right? Yeah. I can't remember. I think this is also stage 1 as well, if I remember correctly. But it's just like those basic, most common functionality. It's going to do a lot of the time zone stuff for you. It's going to be pretty great. Oh, do expressions. So these ones are pretty awesome as well. Again, I write a lot of React, so everything I think of is in terms of React. But if you've ever tried to do conditionals inside of React, it ends up getting pretty painful pretty quickly. However, these things called do expressions, which basically allow you to write like full blocks of code, but have it treated like an expression, right? Anything that's a JavaScript expression is anything that you can put on the right side of an assignment, right? So var x equals blah, whatever blah can be is an expression in JavaScript. But you can put a do block in there, and you can do a bunch of different things, and then have that be the return value of that expression. So it's going to be a pretty powerful feature. I'm pretty stoked on this one too. Stage 0. So you can probably compile your code at stage 2 and be mostly okay most of the time, and not have to refactor that often. If you include codes at stage 0, you're going to have a bad time. You're just going to have a bad day. And there are plenty of horror stories about this, like people writing entire code bases in stage 0 and then having to rewrite it again just because like that stuff didn't make the language. So cool stuff, but be careful, right? This one's been on there for a while. Actually, it's been on there for about 2 years. But I'm hoping this one makes it as well. So if you look down there at the bottom, line 13 is the one that we really care about. So if I don't have view being bound to the correct thing, it's going to call console.table this.state.data. This is not going to be correct, right? I'm going to have to call view.render.bindView for that to actually work correctly, for this to be correct. However, if I put those 2 colons right there, it's going to say make view this, right? So make sure that the context is correct, right? This is just a really short way to bind context correctly. This one's fun, it's nice, it's a convenience method. But what's actually exciting is more the binary version of this, where you can do things like this, right? So you can have like map, take while, and for each, right? Which are just functions that accept. They're basically like functional methodologies, right? But what this is going to take, it's going to take the result of get players and pipe that into map, and it's going to pipe that result into take while, and it's going to pipe that into for each, right? So it actually enables some new paradigms of programming, right? As opposed to right now, right, you couldn't do something like this because these all return arrays, right? An array doesn't have take while. So you can't do this right now. So it's controversial. There's some people pushing back on this one. I'm pretty hopeful on it. I think there's a lot of other languages that have this as well. I think Clojure has it, remember? Yeah, pretty cool. Function expression decorators. This one's brand new as well. This is provident from the Angular team, because Angular loves decorators. I do too. It's basically decorators for functions that you can add kind of in front. Right now, the decorators that are in stage 3 that are going to make it into the language, those are for classes only. So you can't do them just on like normal functions. But this one, I'm sure you could see this one being useful for like testing. Like just say, hey, memoize the result of this, so that if I call it again, it's just going to keep giving you the same answer back as opposed to having to reevaluate it a bunch of times. So that's why this one's going to be really great. Or like you write a long-running test, and it's like, hey, if this takes longer than 6 seconds, just fail it, right? So that's what this timeout 5000 is. Just basic, like, really shorthand's way of doing this. Decorators are really great. This is another good one. This parameter decorators. That basically it's going to inject that parameter. It's going to call that last refresh time, and it's going to pull that in and inject that as a parameter. Again, you could do this on the first line of the function if you wanted to, but this is kind of an interesting way you can do things like dependency injection, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Dead proposals. Object observe. Who remembers this one? So this was the spec that was going to save us all. Back when Angular did dirty checking, I don't know how Angular 2 works, but I know Angular 1 worked with dirty checking, where basically it would run every so often to see if any of your variables had changed, right? So you'd say var x equals 5, and then there's no way to say that if x equals 6, there's no way to inform Angular that x changed, right? So what they would do is they would just look a lot. And if that doesn't sound very performant, it's not. Now, I mean, they made it as fast as it could be, but that eventually has limits, right? If you're tracking 2,000 variables, it's a whole lot of checking to be doing a whole lot of times. So there was proposed this thing called object.observe. It's like, well, why don't we give you the ability to have a callback ran whenever something mutated? Seems pretty cool, right? It turns out this is a bad idea and no one should ever do it. And that's why this spec actually advanced, if I remember correctly, to stage 3 before they eventually said, we're going to move away from this paradigm. This is actually not a good idea. We're going to move into things like using getters and setters, or using not virtual DOM diffing, but yeah, zones, right? And that's another good one as well. Yeah, I didn't talk about zones today. That's another good one to go look up, but I don't think I probably needed 15 minutes just to explain realms and zones. SIMD, this is another one that I was really excited about, and like as of 3 years ago, this was going to be like another really great thing for JavaScript. It's real concurrency in JavaScript, right? Not just like the single-threaded stuff that we have today, but real concurrency. SIMD stands for single instruction, multiple data sources. Yeah, multiple data. Which basically says that I have this one set of thing to be run on multiple different things, right? So you can run that simultaneously across multiple threads. Which is, as you might imagine, be very performant. But this made it all the way to stage 3. In fact, it is still currently on stage 3. This is not technically dead, but it's going to die. It's still a great idea. It's still really cool. You can go actually download a patched version of V8 and play around with it. It's really fast. They can do some really cool stuff with it. But there's kind of the realization that like WebAssembly is coming, right? And WebAssembly is going to change a lot of things. It's going to make new paradigms really possible. And we can use languages like Rust and C++ to write real concurrency and then transpile that or compile that into WebAssembly and run that in browsers. So something like SIMD serves much less of a purpose, and it adds a lot of complexity to the JavaScript language itself. So the decision was kind of made of like, let's take all this complexity and leave it to languages that are already built for this complexity, and leave JavaScript in its kind of single-threaded goodness. And I don't mean that sarcastically. Like, I actually think the single-threaded model, the event loop, and all that kind of things actually end up being a really big boon for JavaScript, because it's very approachable for old and new developers alike. So, yeah, I'm sad to see it go. It was cool. It actually wasn't too unruly to deal with, but I liked it. So at this point, you might be asking, how do I help? Which is a good question. So use the new features, break them, abuse them, go do crazy projects and enable stage 0 in your projects, right? It's a lot of fun. Like, as long as you don't want to have to maintain it for a whole long time, it's a whole lot of fun to mess around with. Tweet about them, talk about conferences. I'm doing my part. What are you doing? Just kidding. Yeah, these first two, if you just do that, you're already doing a great service because you're going to have an opinion about it, and that's actually very useful. So you can go back, whenever you meet someone at a conference, you can say like, I tried this with observables and this breaks. Damn it, Ben, fix it. Just kidding. The third one, follow the TC39 proposals repo. Like, go watch it. That's actually what I do. I just clicked watch, and so anytime they update it, there's quite a bit of traffic on it, so be aware that it's going to take over your whole GitHub feed, but it's cool. You can see the life of these proposals, and as they advance and they go back, and like I'm a nerd. Like I actually go read the documents afterwards to see what they talked about in their meetings. But yeah, that's a really good way to keep abreast. And most of this talk is just taken straight from the repo itself. Propose your ideas. Like if you have like, you can do this in Swift, and I think it's really great, and I think we should add this to JavaScript. Like, feel free to write a proposal and send it over and see what happens. The last one's also, I want to give a big plug to Babel. It's like, how many of you today are using Babel in your projects? I mean, that is a decent chunk of this audience, right? How many of you have ever contributed anything to Babel? Be like Jay. It was just you, pretty much. It's a really underserved project for something that's so important to everything in JavaScript, right? It really pushes the language forward. It makes my job more fun. Like, I legitimately enjoy my job more significantly solely because of this project, right? And the fact that it's being run pretty much by Henry at this point is a damn shame. And there's other people that contribute as well, but definitely Henry is the one that's kind of driving there. So if you're into talking about open source, if you want to contribute to open source, Babel is really a good place to get started. And like, to be honest with you, it's kind of intimidating. It seems like a complicated project, like manipulating abstract syntax trees and all that kind of stuff. I will say that it's something that you can learn, right? There are great resources available to it. I would definitely suggest getting involved with Babel. Here's another just quick pro tip. A lot of people don't know about Babel preset env, and I would definitely suggest that you switch your projects to start using it. So many of you probably just use like the Babel preset ES 2015. I think that's the most common one used, or latest is another one. There's another Babel plugin that they've probably started using, or started with maybe last year. It's not that old. So if you don't know about it, all is forgiven for now. But basically what it is it's like caniuse.com, where you can say like, can I use CSS grids, and it shows you like 60% of browsers use this, right? With Babel preset env, you just say like, hey, can you support like the last 2 major revisions of all major browsers, right? And over time, it's going to start transpiling less and less of your code because the browsers are moving further and further forward, right? So over time, you're going to stop including, the regenerator runtime, or you're going to stop transforming arrow functions, right? And it's eventually just going to start leaving those in, right? So over time, your code gets more and more modern, and you do nothing, right? That's my favorite thing, is code that just works, right? And it gets better over time with 0 effort from me. So check out Babel preset env. There's a bunch of ways you can configure it. You can say last 2 major versions. You can say support Chrome 52 and above. You can say like things like that. So that's what I got. Thank you so much.